Welcome into the podcast. Thanks for joining me as I break down current issues from a biblical perspective. Last week's episode has blown up. Lots and lots of views and listens all across all the different platforms that we're on. I talked about what is going on with Chip and Joanna Gaines, as well as the ICE raid on the California marijuana farm. So there seems to be a lot of interest about those issues and how Christians should respond to those. If you are watching this on YouTube, I want to encourage you to subscribe to the channel. That helps me to be able to continue to put out this kind of content. So I very much appreciate that. Also, if you're listening on another platform, make sure that you give me a 5-star rating, and that would be helpful as well. As always, shoot the link to a friend and encourage them to sign up or to subscribe as well. You can go to my website, jimrichmond.net, and it will ask you right away when you get there to sign up for an email list when you get to the site. And I would encourage you to do that as well to make sure that you get all the content that I put out right in your inbox, and also special offers as well. All right, let's get into our two topics for today. In just a moment, I'm going to talk about what's going on with the Russiagate scandal. But first, let's talk about a bill that is working its way to being passed in California. And I'm talking about California Assembly Bill 495. It's labeled as the Family Preparedness Act of 2025. There is a ton of debate about what it will do. It's promoted as a bill that will help illegal immigrant families quickly make plans to care for their kids if they're suddenly arrested and deported. And so it expands the ability to designate non-relative caregivers such as family friends or mentors to assume legal responsibility for a child's schooling and medical care using a caregiver's authorization affidavit. So on the surface, it kind of feels like maybe California is doing all this to make a really big deal out of the fact that families are being separated by deportations. Best case scenario, they're legitimately just trying to make sure that there's a plan to care for the kids when these situations occur. But here's the problem. The bill's language does not explicitly limit its application to immigrant families. It allows any adult with an established familiar or mentoring relationship to a child to act as a caregiver through the affidavit process without requiring court oversight, notarization, or parental consent in certain cases, i.e., when parents cannot be located. Critics argue that this broad language could apply to any child regardless of immigration status, potentially creating loopholes for misuse. For example, opponents, including parental rights advocates, express concerns that the bill's vague definitions and lack of safeguards could allow unrelated adults to assume control over children in non-immigration related scenarios, raising risks of exploitation or even trafficking. Supporters, including Assemblywoman Celeste Rodriguez, emphasize that the intent is to protect vulnerable children of immigrants. The affidavit process is meant to clarify and strengthen existing caregiving tools. They argue, those who support it, argue that it ensures legal recognition for caregivers to access essential services for children. Some ex-posts and critics, however, highlight that the bill's broad wording could inadvertently apply to all Californians, not just immigrants, due to the lack of specific restrictions to immigration-related cases. Now, on Tuesday, Pastor Jack Hibbs posted on this on X. Here's what he said. He said, California AB 495 is the most dangerous bill we've ever seen, and it's pushed right now by lawmakers in Sacramento. This bill would allow any non-related adult, a neighbor, teacher, ex-relative, or even a complete stranger. And as far as the exact wording of the bill, I will correct him on that. I don't know that it opens the door for complete stranger, although I'm not sure how these relationships are verified. So if a complete stranger claims to be a neighbor, how is that verified? So, but in the actual language, let me just, for my own accuracy here, I just want to say, it doesn't say a complete stranger, but he says it could allow any of these people to take custody of your child without your knowledge or consent, no background check, no court order, no parent signature, just a piece of paper. Again, just making sure that we're clear. For the most part, this would be a process that would be started by the parent. If the parent can't be located, then anybody else could start the process. So again, how are these things being verified? That's the key issue. So Hibbs goes on to say, we're calling on every parent, grandparent, and concerned citizen to show up on August 19th at the Capitol steps in Sacramento. This is the hill to die on. Your attendance matters. And I think part of the concern is that someone can maybe fill out this form. It might not be verified that the parents can't be located. Show up to your child's school, and the school feels like they're required to release the child because you've got this affidavit, and you'd show up to get your kid and they'd be gone. That's kind of what Hibbs is saying. Is that's his fear. So there's a couple important things to think about biblically here. First of all, parental rights need to be an absolute priority unless the child is in physical danger or their basic needs are being neglected. God established the institution of the family before he instituted government. The home is the first and most important institution for the establishment of culture. And so, of course, if the parents are taken out of the picture because of their own behavior, the kids need to be cared for. And I would say in the short term, because if the parents are being deported, I would honestly say it's best if the kids go with the parents. But in the short term, they need some sort of plan to care for these kids. And if the kids are citizens, they still will be citizens when they become adults. I kind of feel like, again, this is super unpopular because people say, oh, they're deporting U.S. citizens. But if your parents are being deported for the sake of the family, and that being the priority, I think the kids should go with the parents. Maybe that's the the parents' decision. They get to decide that. If they want to leave the kid behind with somebody else, I suppose they could do that. But then those people probably need to be fully vetted to make sure that they're being left in a safe situation. And so I think that's really, really important. And the parents should be involved, again, in passing the guardianship to someone else. There shouldn't be a way for someone to just fill out a form and take your child. And if that's true, or if that's not being verified, if the details of these things will not be verified, then it is a very dangerous bill. If for some reason the parents were unfit to make that decision, it should be handled the same way that kids are removed from parents and placed in the foster care system, where there's a lot of vetting, a lot of verifying the details, where family and friends and people close to the child can apply to take care of them. So it feels like in a lot of ways we don't need this. I mean, just think about that. It feels like that there's already a system in place to quickly care for kids whose parents are detained for any reason. If your parents are arrested and taken off to jail, immediately the foster care system is going to handle that. So I'm not real sure exactly why we need something like this. So yeah, that's the first thing. The second thing I will say from a biblical perspective, we have to think through the unintended consequences of laws like this. Too often we multiply laws and we don't think through ways that they could be abused. In this case, they're probably trying so hard to make a point and are not thinking about the ways that things could go wrong. And this is why the Founding Fathers set up a government that was designated or designed to be lean and not try to micromanage everything. We need laws because we're fallen creatures who want to do the wrong thing. But at the same time, too much power in the hands of very few people is also very, very dangerous because they also are fallen creatures. So properly managing this fallenness scale here is the key. How much control do we need to make sure, do we need in terms of laws to make sure that people are not taking advantage of each other, not abusing each other, but how little control can we get by with so that we're not giving the government too much power? That's the sweet spot. That's the sweet spot. And that is coming from an understanding of biblical fallenness. So what should we think about this law? And if you live in California, what should you do about it? First of all, I think the law is maybe not well thought out. Unless it's trying to open up opportunities by accident for people to obtain other people's kids. I don't think it's fully well thought out. I don't think it's tight enough that this is a smart thing. So whatever the goal was, it needs to be totally rethought. There may need to be a plan for families in this situation, but again, the parents should definitely be directing the process. That's the intention of this at the outset, that the parents would initiate this affidavit, but it seems like there's awfully big loopholes to just have somebody else fill it out if the parent's not available, and is all of that going to be verified? Jack Hibbs has also said that if it passes, every Christian family should move out of California. I'm not 100% sure that reaction is warranted, but if you begin to see this process is going to be abused, yeah, maybe you should. If a trafficker could possibly fill out a form and pick up your kid from school, that would be a risk I wouldn't take. Again, we don't know for sure that it's going to go that way, but there is legitimate concern that the language is too broad here. I've tried to research several different sites to see how valid Hibbs' concerns are, and it does seem that there is a great possibility for this process to be abused. So it's definitely something to be watching, and if I was in California, I'd be contacting my state legislator and insisting that they hold up on passing this until they come up with a tighter plan, or maybe figure out how to just use the current foster system that is already there. All right, let's get into Russiagate. Unless you've been living under a rock, you have probably heard that investigations have begun to be opened up on how the Obama administration was involved in pushing the idea that Donald Trump was colluding with Russia to interfere in the 2016 election. If you're not paying close attention to the details, here's what it may feel like. It may just feel like that this is just payback from Trump for all the prosecutions that were done against Donald Trump. The ironic thing is that he's being called a dictator for this, which was none of that language was used during the last administration. Even though I'm not even really sure he's directing the process, I'm sure he would like it looked into since he was harassed by these accusations, and it greatly affected the effectiveness of his first administration. But I think he has just asked his DOJ to see how something that was not true all of a sudden became an issue in the government and in the news, a huge issue during that time period. And so several of Trump's key people, like Mike Flynn, have been persecuted through investigations on this kind of stuff. But it's ironic because of all the frivolous prosecutions against Donald Trump, that they're calling him a dictator for looking into this. It was clear that there was a concerted effort to lock him up and to keep him from running again, with all the prosecutions that they did against him, and so it may just kind of feel like, yeah, this is just retaliation. This is just more dirty government, stuff. The difference here seems to be that there may be, and from the reports that are beginning to emerge, there seems to be possibly clear evidence that former President Obama and Hillary Clinton and their key people were very directly involved in producing, not Obama, but Hillary Clinton, in producing the false Steele dossier and circulating it to the media in order to build the case that Trump had colluded with Russia to cheat in the 2016 election. What seems to be emerging, if this is factual, is that Obama knew that the Steele dossier was false, was incorrect, and yet turned right around after being told, yeah, there's nothing here, and turned around and said, well, our statement is going to be that there is. So that seems to be kind of his level of knowledge about what was going on at this point. So what should we think as Christians? it feels like that we're seeing the lowest form of politics over the last couple presidential terms, right? Politicians just working to put each other behind bars, or at least make sure that the other guy looks super guilty in the court of public opinion. So I think most of us are tempted to just check out on this. And I think as Christians, that would be easy to do, right? Like, hey, like, I'm tired of this. Or maybe condemn all these investigations, no matter which administration is doing them. But here's the problem. I think this was a legitimate attempt to undermine Trump's presidency and possibly get him removed from office. So this really should be thoroughly looked into. We can't allow stuff like this to happen without accountability. It will take accountability for stuff like this to stop happening. And we would really like to see this kind of stuff stop happening. However, one of the things that conservatives have said when Trump was being prosecuted for everything under the sun is that we don't want to be a country in the habit of locking up our political enemies. That is just literally tin pot dictatorship type things where all of your political enemies end up in jail. And I think for the most part, that is a very valid concern. In addition, the Supreme Court has said that we have to be very careful about holding presidents accountable for acts as president. Presidents can't do their job worrying about being locked up by the next person because the next person disagrees with how they did something. Now, obviously, if a president does something like kill someone, something like that, that has nothing to do with the job, and they should be held accountable. So it's hard to figure out what really has to do with the job, what doesn't have to do with the job. But yes, for the most part, we don't want to be a country where we're locking up past presidents. But at the same time, without accountability, this kind of dishonest, dirty politics will continue. So what do? First of all, I think some people should be held accountable and possibly arrested and tried. Many have said that there's plenty of proof that actors such as Brennan and Clapper were directly involved in creating and driving and perpetuating this hoax. If that's the case, and there is a clear case there, then they should be held accountable. However, when it comes to attempting to lock up President Obama, I think that might be a mistake for several reasons. Not because he was not directly involved, not because this is beyond his duties as president, and he should be accountable for it. But listen, I think that first of all, that would open the door for past presidents to constantly be prosecuted. I know the Democrats already started that trend. I understand that, but I think that we don't want to keep this trend up. And I would get lots of testimony of those involved. And if that testimony shows that Obama is guilty, I would get it out there. Maybe I would even allow him to be indicted. But honestly, I would pardon him just on this principle that we're not going to keep prosecuting presidents. Let the world see he could have been prosecuted, but then pardon him. And I'm not saying that out of compassion. This is not one of those Christian we just need to turn the other cheek kind of thing. Because and I'll talk more about that in a second. I'm saying that out of concern for further destabilizing our systems. I don't want to see that. Conservatives are the only ones that worry about breaking the systems, but it is a real concern. Also, I think that attempting to lock up Obama would be a political loss for the Republicans. Frankly, I mean that's not just necessarily a Christian principle, but I think that they're gonna lose on that. Obama is still widely seen by half the country as a great president, and most people will never look at the real evidence. So this will just make Trump look like a dictatorial bully playing right in the hands of those who have constantly called him that. The third thing I would say about it is prosecuting him is a huge risk because no matter how illegal and dirty this may have been, getting around presidential immunity might be a high bar, and you might not actually be able to get a conviction. If he did something that was illegal and dirty, but because of presidential immunity, you can't try him or you can't get him convicted, in the court of public opinion, it's just going to look like, yeah, he got off, like he didn't do anything wrong. They found him innocent, right? That's the way that's going to look. So I don't think that biblically, I don't think it's wise. I think that we will be further harming the the greater good of our country by doing this, but then I also just don't think it's wise in general. And so this is where biblical principles kind of come into play. It's very easy to right now to say, well, they did it to us. Let's give them a taste of their own medicine. And it is true that if a real crime has taken place, there should be some kind of justice. But the reason that God's word says things like, do good to those that prosecute you, overcome evil with good, is because God knows that if you don't, you will tear down civilization and there will never be an end to the revenge game. And that's what we have going on now. Now, let me say, if you've followed me for any length of time, you know that I make a big difference between the government's responsibility and civil justice and personal revenge. You personally should forgive, but that doesn't mean that person shouldn't be prosecuted by the government. So you may think I'm being inconsistent because this is a legal issue, and Donald Trump or whoever was, Mike Flynn, these people who were harmed by this could forgive, but then the government could go ahead and prosecute. So you may think I'm being inconsistent, and I get that. But like I said, if the evidence holds up, there are some people that should be prosecuted. But I think the damage of locking up a former president will ruin our country for good. Losing his reputation, if there's solid evidence and that gets released out into the public, will be punishment enough. Pardoning him will hopefully set an example for folks that will remember the next time that someone wants to do something like what happened to Donald Trump. They'll look back and go, wait a minute. So we're doing this, but they pardoned him. And so I know that doesn't mean that the other side's going to play fair just because of it, but I think if we don't here, I think that it definitely could kind of break the system for good. So that is my take on the Russiagate scandal. What other biblical principles would apply to this situation? I would love to hear what you think. Thanks so much for joining me this week on the Spiritual Reality Podcast. And remember, if you're not living by what God says, you're not living in reality. See you next week.